A Half Century of Kentucky Politics, Chapter 24. And before I get started, I'm going to tell you up front, what I plan on doing this particular lecture is give you a brief look at some of the major accomplishments of the governors that we've had in the last 50 years. A very even briefer look at some of the national things going on. But I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on all the shenanigans that were going on in the politics, all the senators and all the political bosses and things that were going on. This is not a political science class. This is a history class. And as I said, unless you're really into politics, it's a little deep if you want to know the truth. I enjoyed it, but then I happen to be a historian and I happen to enjoy history. I'll make it as quick and painless as possible for you. It starts with Earl C Clements, 1947 to 1950 was when he was governor. He looks like a mean old boy, doesn't he? He's a former sheriff, and he looks like a sheriff. He was a county clerk. He was a county judge. He served a couple of terms as a state senator, 2 terms as a U.S. congressman. When he became governor, he did do some good things. He got the Day Law amended. Remember, that was the one that Senator Day passed a law to prevent blacks and whites from attending the same college. He gets an increase in the gas tax. He gets a tax on pari-mutuel betting. He actually created a new state police force. And when Senator Barkley resigns and becomes Harry Truman's vice president, he appoints a friend of his to run to fill out the term. And as soon as that term was over, he resigns the governorship and runs for the term himself and was elected. It seems that being a state governor, not just Kentucky, but any state, is a stepping stone to becoming a United States senator, which I guess looks better on your resume than saying you were a governor of a state. Lawrence W. Weatherby. He was a governor from 1950 to 1955. He was the Clements lieutenant governor, which seems to be one of the prime requisites to becoming governor. He only held a minor office prior to becoming elected as the lieutenant governor. And when he first became governor, he didn't take him very seriously, but he was a good administrator. And because we had some tax surplus, he used it to help increase teachers' salaries. He lengthened the school term. He also strengthened the teacher tenure program. He created a Department of Mental Health and Youth Authority, which was good. And under his tutelage, we managed to get an amendment passed to let 18-year-olds vote. A.B. Happy Chandler, 1955 to 59. He's at it again. A very contentious race because, well, his nickname was Happy, but he doesn't look too happy in that picture. He accuses the guy running against him, Mr. Combs, of misuse of state funds, and he uses an awful lot of tactics that Senator Cole McCarthy is also using about the same time. Senator McCarthy was a senator from, of course, Wisconsin, and he believed in, if you tell a lie, you get caught in that lie, tell another lie. Come out swinging, never defend, never excuse. And unfortunately, this is what Mr. Chandler's tactics were. When Senator Barkley dies, they let the Senate rate open for Republican hopefuls. And there was a lot of opposition in the legislature. Actually, he had to ally himself with Republicans, but he did accomplish a few things. He got the race tax lowered, then he turned around and raised them again. He broadened the income tax, and then he turned around and lowered it again. He did expand the tax on trucks and corporations and liquor, and he moved the state health department to Frankfort. He also passed a rule that the highway department had to use their own workers and not farm them out or contract them out. He abolished the merit system from the Children's Bureau, and he required exams for the probation and parole officers, which was good. But due to a controversy over who he was appointing for the Court of Appeals, he left with a, shall we say, sour taste in everybody's mouth. But he did take the high ground on the racial integration, and he did see that the state was integrated according to law, although he himself did not go along with it. Bert Combs from 59 to 63. A lot of allegations and bribes. He's a very anti-Chandlerite. He accused Chandler of shooting geese out of season, which I thought was one of the most ridiculous things you could possibly... Did you remember reading some of those crazy accusations that's going on? You fuss at somebody for shooting geese out of season. I laugh out loud. He did manage to give the veterans a bonus and get through a 3% tax, which not only gave the veterans a bonus, but he gave a lot of money extra. So for the first time, we're going to have a little bit of surplus. Very progressive. He established a state merit system. He established a Human Rights Commission. He got voting machines instead of going with a ballot. And I don't know, since you all have never used a ballot, paper ballot to vote, there's something satisfying about putting an X on a piece of paper and putting it in a box. But we've got machines now. He made it a felony to access the state employees for political campaigns. And it used to be you would be, you encouraged to contribute through donations to your paycheck. Well, under his tutelage, they had the first billion-dollar budget, which increased school funds by 50%, which was good. And you can say Mr. Combs is responsible for forming the community college system. He also, because of the 3% tax and the extra funds, managed to fund the Chandler Medical Center at the University of Kentucky, which really frosted him because he didn't like Chandler. He set up toll roads. He got state parks, got money. The negative thing was, there again, naming a highway commissioner got him into trouble because it turned out to be a friend who was doing things for the government. In the national politics about this time, coming into the 60s, you've got Richard Nixon running against the Catholic John Kennedy. And of course, Kennedy wins the election. But these 60s, you've got the civil rights problems going on. You've got the Cold War still going on. You've got communist fears. Everybody's afraid of Russia. You've got the Vietnam War. And all these are national issues, but there are also concerns here in Kentucky. And our first Kentuckian actually dies in Vietnam in 1962. A man named Henry Caldwell wrote Night Comes to the Cumberlands. I debated whether to have you all read that or not, but it's got a lot of good information, but it's a little bit dry reading. But he called for action on the eastern Kentucky pollution, primarily in the coal mining, and explains all the bad effects of coal mining. Explains about the poor medical care and the bad roads and the few colleges and the substandard housing, the absentee ownership. A small percentage even had running water, and 2 out of every 5 households in the Appalachian is below the poverty level. And of course, because of this, you have a lot of out-migration. So things are not going well in eastern Kentucky. Then President Kennedy is assassinated in 1963, and Lyndon Baines Johnson becomes president. He visits the Appalachian, and he starts not directly because of the Appalachian, but it had a great deal to do with it. It's war on poverty. Every president has a plan. You know, FDR had his New Deal, and Truman had his Fair Deal, and Johnson's going to have his war on poverty. There's a lot of different agencies formed to help, and your text gives you a list of them. They tried to help, but it's kind of like putting your finger in a dike when the dike is bringing a leak. He didn't really stop. He slowed it down a little bit. And I thought this was interesting. Man and wife Alan and Margaret McSherry came from D.C. to help, and they were arrested for criminal syndicalism. Basically because they had books that were written by Karl Marx and Barry Goldwater, which were very leftist in their leanings, and this was not going to be taking place in the very conservative eastern Kentucky. But like I said, poverty was not eradicated. It was slowed down. And when you slow down some of the poverty problems, some of the out-migration slows down. And the infant mortality rate is coming down a little bit, but it's still way, way above the national average. And Chandler actually tries to get elected to a 3rd term. Now, see, we had this law. You couldn't run consecutively, but you could run again and again. And as you noticed when you were reading the text, how many times in the elections a former governor was running for a governorship again. A very contentious primary in 1963, but he's not going to get the nomination. Edward Thomas Barrett Jr., from 63 to 67. He was a Republican, and he orchestrates a very nasty campaign. None was racist, and that's who was running against him. He was against open housing. Now, Barrett's accomplishments were a Civil Rights Act, strong strip mining act at long last. You got a Corrupt Practices Act passed. You got more funds for schools. You got more funds for rural roads. And he's the one responsible for the initial funding for the KET, Kentucky Educational Television Show. It's not show, but program, which I happen to be I really like it. I watch it a lot. 125,000 Kentuckians served in Vietnam. Over 1,000 died and thousands more were wounded, and not just physically, but mentally. We can't begin to understand the things that these young men saw in those jungles and the guerrilla fighting over there. It was just atrocious. And although they were claiming that the Vietnam vets were coming back drug addicts, I can completely understand how seeing some of the things that they had seen, it would make me want to do something too. The Kentucky politicians, as well as our national politicians, are beginning to get a little upset with the government over this Vietnam War, and they actually break with President Johnson over his policies. Louie Brody Nunn. Mr. Dunn is, no matter how you say it, he was a racist. And when I first read about Mr. Dunn in my first Kentucky history class, I didn't see a picture of him, and I thought he was going to be a short, fat redneck. And I was very surprised that he was tall and attractive looking. But he was a hard, dirty campaigner. He used every dirty trick he could find against anybody, and he attacked his opponents, and he was a liberal New Yorker and a Catholic. And he uses the country's unrest because at this time frame, our civil rights movement had moved from demonstrations and nonviolence. We've got a president who's been assassinated. We're going to have a president's brother who's going to be assassinated. We're going to have Martin Luther King assassinated. We've got Malcolm X assassinated. The violence is really bad. And he uses the fact that there's a lot of racial unrest to help him gain office. He's the first Republican governor in over 24 years. But his lieutenant governor in both the houses are Democratic. So he's not going to have a very good relationship. Meanwhile, President Nixon is elected. And Nunn's accomplishments, he did get a few things done. He got an open housing law passed. He increases the sales tax, which they call Nunn's nickel. He increased it to 5%. He sent troops both to Louisville in 68 and the University of Kentucky in 70 when there was rioting. And didn't you love that bit about the mule gift, where he was given a mule as a gift? And I'll see if I can find where it is in the book. He said when he looked at the animal's face, he thought of the sadness among the poor. And then he looked at the backside of the mule, and it reminded him of the burden on the backs of the taxpayer helping to take care of the poor. Then he concluded, and then as the mule walks away from me, I look at the rear quarters of this mule, and I shall always be mindful of the conduct and the behavior of some of those who made this presentation to me. The mule, which they called Hope, was not accepted and returned to Knox County. But I thought it was kind of funny. Meanwhile, riots end. Integration becomes the rule, peaceful. And race no longer seems to be an issue, so Nunn doesn't really have a good political campaign going. Wendell Hampton Ford. Now, he was Nunn's lieutenant governor and from western Kentucky and Davis County, as a matter of fact. I've met this gentleman personally, and as much as I had read about him and done research on him, I just thought he was, big as a mountain. He always did so much for our area of the state. And when I met him, I was so surprised. He's a short man. I'm not a really tall person. I'm 5'7", but believe me, he barely came to my chin. He got the sales tax removed from food. He reorganized the state government. He got a severance tax on coal authorized, which he got additional funding for education. And then he resigned to become a senator, because like I said, that's the stepping stone. He ran for and won the Senate seat in 1974, and he was the senator for the next 20 years. He even became the Speaker of the Senate. For the first time, Kentucky now has 2 Democratic senators. Julian Martin Carroll, 1974 to 79. Now, he was Ford's lieutenant governor. See, we've got a theme going here. He finished Ford's term, and then he was elected in his own right. Now, he was an attorney. He was a good speaker, and he even served 10 years in the legislature. So he was an accomplished and experienced politician. He got money for the schools and the parks. He got aid for the poor to help pay their utility bills, and he reorganized the legal system. But while he's trying to do things, the state is undergoing floods and fires and mining disasters, and it's just big problems. And then he had problems with his lieutenant governor. The law is that when the governor is out of state, the lieutenant governor acts with the full authority of the governor. And she got some things pushed through that were not too good, and he was having problems with the legislature. It seemed like the governor always has problems with the legislature. John Young Brown Jr., 1979 to 1983. He brings in a new way of doing things. He's attractive. He's a son of a politician. He was also married to Miss America, so he knew about publicity. He was also rich, very involved with the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise, and he learned how to use the television and advertisements to gain people's support. The accomplishments, he started a whole new trend in the way you campaign for the use of TV and as a self-funded candidate. Now, this is good. And he had a very casual attitude toward government, and he was gone an awful lot of the time with his wife and other things. He did reduce the state government personnel. He instituted a policy of competitive bidding for state contracts. And he did have a scandal-free administration, which I guess that's a big plus, isn't it? But unfortunately, the unemployment increased during his tenure, expenditures increased by the government, and the per capita income was very, very low. And I guess you'd say he died. He hid his bad health problems. Now, if you were to check your text, on my page 411, there's a personal income per capita between 1930 and 1990. And for instance, in 1990 in Kentucky, the average income was $14,747. But the average for the rest of the country was $18,666. So we're decreasing percentage-wise, and the rest of the states are increasing. And we're always in the bottom 4 or 5 states. Martha Layne Collins. Now, she was Brown's lieutenant governor. It continues. And they say it's one of the most dull races they ever had. There wasn't any real activity going on. Nobody got mad. Nobody said anything dirty. Very attractive woman. Former school teacher. But she was very active politically. She served as the clerk of Court of Appeals. I think it was Ford that got her that position. And she was lieutenant governor. And in Brown's absences, which were a lot, she ruled the state, and it actually helped her gain experience. So you can say she was the educational reform governor. She got more money for education. She reduced class sizes. She got teachers' pay increased. She had a real good working relationship with the legislature, and you can thank Miss Governor Martha Layne Collins for getting Toyota to come to our state. Wallace Glen Wilkerson, 1987 to 1991. Political newcomer, millionaire, very hands-on once he got elected. His accomplishments, in all honesty, I voted for this man because he was going to do a state lottery, and the lottery money was going to be used for education. We found out later that it went into the general fund, but that's another story. He got a constitutional amendment that required landowners' approval before you could do strip mining, which was the greatest thing that could possibly happen. That broad land deed that they used to have, whereby you could buy an acre of land for $1, and then the man couldn't say or do anything about what you were going to do to his land. You got the sales tax increase for education, and he is responsible for CARA, Kentucky Educational Reform Act. So although he wasn't as focused on individual, pay increases and type things, he was trying to reform the whole educational system, and it did get nationwide attention. And he began to focus on the rural areas and illiteracy. Brigantine Jones, 91 to 95. He was Wilkerson's lieutenant governor. Former Republican, changed to become a Democrat. He was seen as a reformer, and he came at a good time because right after all the scandals we're going to have with Bob Trop and everything. He did not have good relations with the legislature, and the state's newspapers did not like him. But he did get some things done. He got an ethics law passed. He got restrictions placed on lobbyists and the campaign reform. He got some finance reforms. He got a constitutional amendment so the governor could serve the second term, although it didn't affect him because he was a governor in time, it would affect the next governor. He got a seatbelt law passed. He got a new health care system. He appointed the first woman to Kentucky's state Supreme Court. So although not well liked and not really a pushy guy, he did get some things accomplished. Paul Patton, 95 to 2003, and quite frankly, he's one of my favorite governors. I also voted for this man. He's going to be the first governor who's going to be able to serve 2 consecutive terms. Very wealthy coal operator. He was Jones's lieutenant governor. His accomplishments, he's the one, which I don't like this, he separated the community college system from the University of Kentucky, and now we've become the Owensboro Community and Technical College System, which is what we have now. He got a Criminal Justice Reform Act passed, but his failures, the Republicans are in control of the legislature. He's got bad relations. And bless his old stinky heart, he didn't have a financial scandal. He had a sex scandal. Tina Connor was a lady in charge of a bunch of nursing homes, and it got very hairy, and people got upset with me because I said I was glad to see a governor have a scandal that didn't involve taking money out of the government's pocket and putting it in your own. He also was accused of pardoning some of his political advisors that had been sent to jail. as we call it, midnight pardons. The president does it, the governors do it. As they're going out of office, they sign all these releases. I kind of like Mr. Patton. Our two 20th century governors, which are not mentioned in your text, are Ernest Fletcher, whom I had the privilege, I guess you'd say, of meeting, and Steve Brashear, whom I've never met. Ernest Fletcher came out to the community college and spoke not once but several times, drumming up support and trying to get our vote. And, oh, he was a talker. A smooth man, I'm telling you. Honey rolled off that man's mouth. Steve Brashear, I've never met, although he's been in Western Kentucky several times. And, of course, his main thing right now is to try to get legalized gambling. Bob Trott. Yeah, from reading the text and just listening to various and other things, you know that politics in Kentucky is about as crooked as a dog's hind leg. So corruption is not unknown. And usually we kind of, wink one eye and look the other way if it's not too terribly bad. And patronage is very well known. It's been known since the day we became a state. Once you get into being a governor, you help your friends. You repay favors that have been done for you. But the Business Organization and Professions Committee and Trotting Track Involvement, that's a long name for Bob Trott. It was a federal investigation. And over 20 legislators were convicted for accepting bribes. And the general consensus was that we were shocked they had to be caught, but what shocked us more than anything else was the fact that some of the bribes were as little as $100. And when I read about it, I quite honestly thought it sounded like a setup to me, that you were entrapment. I can't imagine why anyone would sell their soul to the devil, so to speak, for $100. It just didn't make any sense to me. But Governor Collins, former Governor Collins, her husband was convicted of extortion and tax fraud, so she's off the political scene. She's not going to be back. But meanwhile, Kentucky voters are starting to stay away from the polls, and less than 50% of our voters who are registered to vote don't vote. Why? Corruption? Apathy? My vote doesn't count? But the government is not going to change, folks, unless people take an interest and take the time to listen to what's being said and what's being done and vote. It's been said we get what we deserve, so be sure and vote this November, because we got big presidential elections coming up in November. Never think that your vote doesn't count. Remember this, an organized minority can gain control really, really easy. And now you know more than you ever wanted to know about Kentucky's governors, and I'm sorry about that. But the next chapter, 25, is much more interesting, and the last one you have to read. So work your 4 questions and quiz, and don't forget to work on your critical analysis.